Hello, welcome back to another edition of Special Report Online. We took a few weeks off for the holidays, but back in business. Live page got a bit of an update, so in order to join the discussion, all you have to do is click on Interact with the Show, the yellow tab to the right of the video window, and that should open up all the comments. Thread underneath, and we have a special guest still with us, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. Thanks for sticking around.
Thanks for having me.
We have you for a couple minutes here. This is a lot more relaxed. A few questions that are, you know, you never know.
Video.
Yeah, it's still on video. Yeah. No, nobody's watching. You can say whatever.
Exactly.
So these are some of the questions. Scott Rosen writes in, Senator Rubio, what's your opinion of Charlie Crist's full morph to Democrat and running for governor?
Well, he's running out of parties. I mean, say he was a Republican and an independent, now a Democrat. I don't know what he'll do next, but he's not going to be governor again. He's not going to. Governor Scott's going to win. You know, that's my opinion. I don't think he was a very good governor when he was there, and I have nothing personal against him, but he wasn't a good governor. He has a record now, and as far as governing the state of Florida, and it didn't do well when he was governor.
George?
People are talking about poverty today, and it's going to be the theme of the President's State of the Union, evidently, and he's going to stress equality, as though poverty and equality are somehow the same subject. Poverty is inherently bad. Inequality isn't. The people have different ability to add value to the economy are going to have disparities of income. How do you decide how much inequality of income is too much?
Well, first,
or should the market decide?
Yeah, so focusing on inequality of income in and of itself does not portray the accurate picture of what we should be focused on. What we should be focused on is equality of opportunity. And it's important in that realm to understand that many Americans want to be wealthy, and most wouldn't mind it. But that's not the goal most people have for their life. I can just give you the example of my parents. The goal my parents had for life was to find a good, stable job where they could provide for us, enjoy some of the things they like to do, and give us the chance to have a better life. And that's how they define happiness. And what people are entitled to in America, and what we say everyone has a God-given right to, is the right to pursue that happiness equally without being restrained by government or by your background. And that's what we need to be focused on, is equality of opportunity. So the example I have used is, you know, there's a cashier at a fast food restaurant. That person's not going to make as much as the CEO of that company. And people understand that. The question is, does that person get stuck at that level for the rest of their lives, or are they allowed to improve their lives? And if they are, you've got mobility. And if they are not, you have a problem. And that's what I want us to focus on. The programs we have in place right now, they only deal with the consequences of poverty, but they do not help people emerge from it. And that's why these solutions have utility, but they're not they're incomplete, because they don't address the structural causes of opportunity inequality. And that's what we should never say is acceptable. We should never accept the notion that in this country there are people that will not have the same opportunities because their families aren't connected, they don't come from privilege or wealth, or because the government's holding them back. That's not an American principle we should accept.
Do you think this deal on unemployment is going to work out, this pay for? Do you think it's all going to...
You know, I hope so, because it makes all the sense in the world. I mean, it's not hard to pay for. We have plenty of fat and waste in the discretionary budget of the United States government. There have been multiple efforts made to show how we could pay for it. Unfortunately, Senator Reid is not allowing any amendments to be voted on, any sort other than his. And I think that's wrong. Beyond just extending it, by the way, I think we should look to the models of some of our states that have found ways to go to the long-term unemployed and provide them with the ability to access and acquire additional skills so that they become more employable. Because what we know about long-term unemployment is that the longer you're unemployed, not only is it devastating personally, but it makes it harder for you to get a job. People are less likely to hire someone who's been out of work for a significant period of time. And that impediment that's keeping people from finding a job is that the jobs that are available and the skills that they have do not match up. And we've got to close that gap.
Juan?
Senator Rubio, you know, the speech you gave today, I think, is part of an effort on the part of Republicans to show that they are, to use George W. Bush's language, compassionate conservatives. But in your case, you voted against opening the debate in the Senate on the extension of unemployment benefits, and you've also expressed opposition to raising the minimum wage. So how does that fit? How does that work?
Well, let me first of all, the reason why I voted against opening the debate is because Harry Reid said he wouldn't allow us to file any amendments. In essence, the only thing we can vote on is this effort or nothing at all, without offering any sort of solutions or alternatives of how to reform the system. And I think that's unfair and wrong. Now, if he opens it up to debate, and he opens it up to amendments, and people are allowed to make suggestions, I think you'll see bipartisan amendments filed. I mean, why would anyone be against a proposal, for example, that I'm prepared to introduce, which says that if you're someone on long-term unemployment should also be given a chance, and maybe even the requirement, to do some skills training so they become more employable.
Maybe you
He won't
could
allow
have
that.
Maybe you could have that discussion down the road, but there are people right now who are losing unemployment benefits and who are in dire straits.
And I think the best thing we can do for them is, in the short term, extend those benefits, but also help them to acquire the skills so they can get off long-term unemployment. And Harry Reid will not allow a vote on any of the things that will help them happen.
I see that discussion as something you could do in the long term. But let me also say today...
Well, he's saying it's not open in the long term either.
No, he didn't say that. I mean, clearly he wants to get something done right now to help people who are in bad situations. But clearly, and this would only extend it for a certain amount of time, and then you'd have to have a discussion, because I don't believe anyone wants it to go on an interminable basis. But let me just say, you have an interesting situation. Today you said the war on poverty, a failure. President Johnson 50 years ago. In your state of Florida, though, a lot of people have benefited from the 1965 Social Security Act, which created Medicare and Medicaid. In fact, I think Florida is the second biggest state in the union when it comes to receiving Medicare benefits. Wouldn't you say that, in fact, the war on poverty has done a great deal to end poverty among seniors in our nation?
I think the war on poverty is a failure because it's incomplete. It didn't solve the problem it set out to solve, which is to help people emerge from poverty. On the contrary, we now have close to 50 million people living under the poverty line in the United States. And the problem that I have with our existing platform of services for people that are poor is, again, it deals with the consequences of poverty. And that's important. You have to do that in the short term, but it does nothing to help them emerge from poverty permanently. And that's not being addressed.
But you understood what I said, that it was for seniors.
Well, that's
the elderly.
And
I think Medicare and Medicaid have been a great beneficiary. In fact, more people would be in poverty if we didn't have the Social Security Act.
But that's another. You're now asking me about programs in Social Security and Medicare that are there for retirees, and that's a different situation. And by the way, I would make another caveat, and that is there are people that cannot take care of themselves. If you're 84 years old living in poverty, you can't go out and get a full-time job, or shouldn't be expected to. There are people that are disabled. There are people that legitimately cannot work. And we are a country that has said we understand that and we will help you. I'm talking about the vast majority of people in poverty who are able-bodied, who would like to work and would like to have a better life, but are being held back by societal, economic, and educational factors. And we need to address that. If we want a real war on poverty, we have to fight a war for equal opportunity.
Let me turn you. We have a couple more minutes. Brian Rohrbrecher writes in that, and he was following you in your effort to get the Senate to move on immigration reform. And it seems like he was behind you in what he's typing here. He asks, where do you stand on it now? What are your regrets in how it all rolled out?
Well, a couple things. First of all, my regrets is we couldn't get more people to be supportive of it, and because obviously I think this is an important issue that needs to be solved. And the observation I've made about immigration reform is one that, by the way, I think is indisputable, and that is, as it currently stands, we're not going to make progress. You are not going to, at this stage, given everything that's happened with Obamacare and other issues that have undermined people's confidence in the federal government, you are not going to pass one big piece of legislation that requires trust that the federal government's going to enforce the law. So I think a better approach to immigration reform at this stage, given all these factors I've outlined, is a sequential process that begins to deal with elements of immigration reform until you've solved it all.
And you think that's what Speaker Boehner is in the process?
Well, we'll see. I mean, obviously they need to make a decision about the way they want to pursue, but it sounds like that's the direction that they're headed. And by the way, most of the issues on immigration reform are not controversial. I mean, most people agree we have to move away from a family-based system and towards a merit-based system. And most people agree we need to have a functional agricultural workers system. We shouldn't be deporting people with PhDs, things of this nature. I think where you get into political difficulties is what to do with the 11 or 12 million people that are in this country illegally. And the one thing that progress has been made on is there is now an acknowledgement through the Senate bill by Democrats that any effort to deal with people that are here illegally must be linked and triggered by measurable security measures that ensure this problem never happens again. That's something that at this time last year Democrats said they would not accept, the link between those two things.
But Senator, you drove that immigration policy,
right?
And so many people thought you were daring to do so. Then you turn around and say, nope, you know, I'm not no longer supportive of that bill. And I think it took away momentum from so many in the House who were looking to you.
There was no momentum in the House. The Senate bill wasn't going anywhere in the House and never was going to go once that thing took on the shape that it did. Here's what I've said. My interest in being involved in immigration reform is to make progress on an issue that's important to the country. And the only thing I've said is something the President's actually admitted himself. And that is that given the way things are right now, you are not going to pass one big, huge bill on immigration. You're going to have to deal with this in individual steps that ultimately get you there. And by the way, I believe, Juan, that if we can actually begin to make progress on the things we agree on, you create both momentum and the conditions to ultimately deal with this in a responsible way. And,
well, I'm tempted to ask you how you can help me convince people like Juan that more government spending doesn't equal compassion. But I'll say that. You're not going to tell us whether you're running for president in 2016. You're not going to tell us here tonight.
But it is online.
And I know that.
It's online. Nobody's really watching.
I know that. But here's my question. Anybody who would be thinking about running for president in 2016 has to spend some time, whether it's on a long flight back to Florida or at home at night flipping channels, thinking, I might run for president. Are you having those thoughts?
No, listen, the situation I'm in is that in 2016, I have to decide whether I want to run for re-election in the Senate, run for something else, or quite frankly, become a private citizen again. All three are legitimate options. And that's a decision I'll have to make at this time next year. You know, in the interim, what I've learned in the time I've been in public service is the more you think about what your next political move is, the more it influences the decisions you make and the harder it is for you to do a good job. So I'm going to do the best job that I can, as I've tried to do the last 3 years, on behalf of the people of Florida. And then in a year, I'll make a decision about where I am from a personal perspective and political perspective, and kind of figure out where it is, what I want to do for the next 6 to 8 years.
So when people give you hypotheticals about President Rubio, that doesn't even factor. You never take it home and think about it or talk to people about it.
No, because irrespective of whether you bring it up that way or not, these are issues that are national issues. I'm on foreign relations. I'm on the Intelligence Committee. I have to have opinions on these issues, whether I'm a senator or something else. So.
I think I posed 3 tonight, but I'm not sure. 2 more questions, one from George and one from Hannah Smith here. What happens if Republicans take the Senate in 2014? What will their first goal be, do you think?
Well, certainly I think we'd have to deal with the Obamacare disaster, which I think will continue to get worse over the next year. You know, it's now transformed from this theoretical thing that's going to happen in the future to a thing that's actually happening to people now. And I think one of the next things you're going to see in March or April of next year is many of the companies that are now participating in the exchange will decide no longer to participate next year. Either because they didn't get the patient mix they were promised, or they're going to have to raise premiums to a level that really make these changes unviable. So we're going to have to deal with that, and I think that's going to have to be the first order of business. Beyond that, I think we need to finally, once and for all, deal with the national debt. I mean, this is an issue that's destroying job creation in America. It's creating a tremendous amount of uncertainty about the future. We are lucky that interest rates right now and the yield on the bonds is at a historically low level. If those things climb to the historical norm, we're going to have a huge problem just making the interest payments on the debt long term. We have to begin to deal with that. We're the party of fiscal responsibility. That's got to be an issue we lead on.
Because you're on these committees that deal with Iran, let me ask something about that. Foreign Minister Zarif of Iran says that Iraq, the heavy water facility, has just had too much Iranian investment to shut down.
Right.
Wouldn't be fair. And he says of Fordo, the enrichment facility that's hardened under a mountain, I guess, that it cannot be hit. Which makes you think that he's not thinking of ending their nuclear program, that they're going to go at least to a breakout capacity where they could quickly become a nuclear power if they wanted. The hypothetical President Rubio, would he be for using force to stop that? Or does he think that that can be outsourced to Israel? Does the Israeli Air Force have the capacity to set that back?
Well, the Israelis will have to make a decision based on their own national security. I can tell you from the United States perspective, a nuclear-armed Iran especially, is not something that we can permit. It's just not something. It destabilizes the region. It would trigger a regional arms race.
It's worth a war to stop it.
It's worth doing anything we have to. It is that serious of an issue. And it needs to be addressed. I have never believed that the Iranians are serious about reaching a deal, and I want to be wrong, but I've never been the contrary. I believe that they are following the model of North Korea, which is to give small concessions, but nothing irreversible in exchange for sanction relief, hopefully undermine the international sanctions that are in place, and hope the world will just pay attention to something else, and then they can break out or get themselves to a point of capacity. And the danger in that isn't just a nuclear Iran. You're going to have a nuclear Saudi Arabia, potentially a nuclear Turkey. I mean, it's just the most unstable, dangerous region in the world could now have 3 or 4 nuclear powers in less than a decade.
But if you are right, and I think you are about Iranian intentions, and if you are right about your judgment that that's unacceptable and a war is more acceptable, then there's a war in our future. That's the logic of what you're saying.
Unless Iran ultimately realizes that the cost-benefit analysis is not worth it.
Which you do not expect them to do.
Well, not under the current direction that we're headed. On the contrary, I think they believe that they can gain themselves some time and get some sanctions relief in the short term. And ultimately, when people are paying attention to something else or the price becomes too high for the U.S., then they can kind of break out or get to the point where they can break out. I think they've made that, and their president has bragged about having done these sorts of things in the past. So I think that's exactly where they're headed, unfortunately, and I think it leaves us in a very dangerous position.
Well, the administration seems to suggest that they will know when that breakout moment is. You're on the intelligence community. Do you have the same confidence that we will know?
We may or may not. But first of all, the Iranians have always had a secret element to their program. We just recently, less than 2 years ago, discovered an additional secret facility. Beyond that, I would say they don't have to break out. That's what people don't understand. All they need to do is be able to retain some sort of international recognition that they have a right to domestic enrichment. And once they have that, they are not that far. All they have to do is get to the point where they can decide we may not have a bomb, but we can have one as soon as we want one.
But and that
makes them a nuclear power.
Didn't they get that acknowledgement of the right to
I can see that they did. I can see that that's where we're headed, in essence. That because once you recognize a domestic right to enrich, you are at a point where you can break out any time you decide to. And meanwhile, they continue to invest in long-range missile capability. Why do you build long-range missiles? It isn't to conduct a fireworks show. It's to launch things into space, but more importantly, to launch warheads across the Atlantic.
Well, let's not end on that. How about Super Bowl favorite?
Oh, wow. Well, you know, I mean, I know the trendy choice is going to be what probably people are going to say is the Seahawks and the 49ers. But I'll be daring. I'll say the Seahawks. I'm sorry, not the Seahawks and the 49ers, the Seahawks and the Broncos. But I'm going to say it's going to be the Seahawks and, God, it breaks my heart to say this, the Patriots.
Can I ask
True Dolphins fans.
Winning.
Let me ask one overtime question. You know,
you're not going to take us down some horrible lane, are you, Juan?
I always do.
All right.
That's why you hired me.
Is it NFL related?
No. But I will say this: you come from Cuban immigrants to the United States. I come from Panamanian immigrants to the United States. I think a lot of people had a lot of hope for you with regard to that immigration bill. The political analysis around town is you lost stock with Tea Party activists because you spearheaded the immigration bill, and that you now feel you have to rebuild with that constituency. Is that analysis wrong?
I think it's wrong. First of all, every position that I've adopted since immigration reform is consistent with the things I said in my campaign and the things I voted on. I mean, there's not a thing I'm for today that I wasn't for before in terms of, if you look at every one of these issues. I never voted for a short-term budget in the time that I've been here because I think that they don't deal with our national issue that we're facing with the national debt. Beyond that, I would say, look, I came here to make a difference. I didn't run for office to sign onto a bunch of letters and give speeches. And I'm from Florida. We have a serious immigration issue, and it's hurting our economy, but I also know human beings that are affected by it. I think it's good for our country to fix this issue. Now, we can robustly debate about the best way to fix it, and I certainly don't think we should be condoning the breaking of our laws or encouraging people to do so in the future. But I also believe that if you're really interested in that, and I am, leaving things the way they are is de facto amnesty.
Well, I agree, but you had a pathway to citizenship in your bill. It seemed to have cost you politically, and then you back off, and it makes people think that you are having a political, not a principled response.
But I disagree with that premise. Back off. The bill's passed the Senate. We're not going to pass a second bill. The question now is, what should the House do? The House has made it very clear what they're willing to do and not do. And so the choice we have now is twofold. We can either dig in and say Senate bill or nothing, which I think will leave us with nothing, or we can say, well, the approach the House is pursuing is a reasonable one, which is let's do this in pieces, let's start doing the things we can agree on first, and hopefully that creates the conditions to finish the job.
You've seen Speaker Boehner just hired Rebecca Talent as someone who with a great immigration background to come in, so it looks like they want to do something. The question is, will they have a pathway to citizenship? That does not seem to be on the table.
That I can't answer for you because I don't know what their internal debate is with regards to that. I can say to you that ultimately, if you want to solve the entire immigration problem, you're going to have to address the fact that you have 11 or 12 million people here illegally. But the question is that the first thing you do or the last thing you do? And I would argue to you that if you deal with some of the other elements first, and if you put in place verifiable and completed security measures that give people confidence that the law is going to be enforced, I think you're going to make it, not a guarantee, but I think you're going to make it a lot easier.
Last thing, politically, Republicans dealing with immigration, do you think, in 2014, before the election, and where does it stack in the lineup of political issues ahead of the election?
I have never viewed, nor have I ever claimed, that passing immigration reform is going to all of a sudden bring a rush of Hispanic voters to the Republican Party. I think you need to earn their vote the way you earn anyone's vote, and that is by understanding people's hopes and dreams and offering an agenda that reflects that. And I think that's true for Hispanics as it is for all Americans. There is some political utility in doing it. I think if you could move beyond that issue, you could actually try to convince working class people, many of whom are Hispanics, that our agenda is better for them than big government. Sometimes that's hard to do because Democrats don't even have to have the debate with you. They just say, well, they're the guys that want to deport your grandmother. So but that's not the reason to do it. This is a real problem for the country, but it needs to be fixed the right way. And in this republic, fixing something requires the House, the Senate, and the President. I'm trying to be realistic about what's possible given that dynamic.
Senator, thank you very much for your time.